Hey, stop scrolling for a second. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It's something that actually happened in one of the most expensive hotels in New York City. And it involves a maid, a billionaire, a golden staircase, and a glass elevator that nearly became a woman's tomb. I wasn't going to share this one. It's too raw, too real. But I have to. Because somewhere in this story you're going to see yourself. You're going to see every time someone judged you before they knew your truth. Every time you were pushed down by people who thought money made them better than you. Stay with me. This gets unbelievable. Hey friends, welcome back. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one of them, and it means the world to see where this story is reaching. Today's story is one of the most emotional, heart-pounding tales I've ever told you. It's about a woman who had nothing but her dignity, and a family who had everything except the one thing that mattered. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming. Let's begin. It started like every other day at the Hartwell Grand. The Hartwell Grand Hotel sat on Fifth Avenue like a crown jewel dropped from the sky. 60 floors of marble, gold trim, and chandeliers so heavy they needed steel cables just to hang from the ceiling. Doormen in white gloves. A lobby that smelled like fresh lilies and old money. It was the kind of place where a cup of coffee cost more than some people made in a day. And nobody who worked there ever forgot it. Maria Alvarez had worked there for 6 years. She was 29 years old, though the tired lines under her eyes sometimes made her look older. She started at 5 in the morning, folding towels into perfect triangles, scrubbing bathtubs until they gleamed, making beds so tight you could bounce a coin off them. She did this for the Hartwell Grand's wealthiest guests, people who never once looked her in the eye, who left room service trays on the floor like she was invisible, who tipped in pennies or not at all. But Maria didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Every dollar she earned went to one place. A small apartment in Queens where her 7-year-old son Diego waited for her every evening with a hug so tight it nearly knocked her over. Diego had asthma. The medication wasn't cheap. Maria worked doubles whenever she could, picked up extra shifts on holidays when other maids wanted to be home with their families, because Diego needed inhalers, and inhalers needed money, and money needed Maria to keep her head down and her mouth shut. She'd learned a long time ago. In hotels like this, the maid who's seen is the maid who's fired. That morning, Maria had been assigned the presidential suite on the 58th floor. It belonged, for this particular week, to one of the richest men in America. Daniel Hartwell himself, heir to the hotel empire that bore his family's name, a man whose face had been on magazine covers since he was 25. Daniel wasn't cruel like some of the other guests. In fact, in 6 years, Maria had barely exchanged 10 words with him. He was polite in that distant, distracted way rich men often are. A nod here, a thank you there, never really seeing her. But today, everything was different because today, Daniel Hartwell was getting engaged. The entire 58th floor had been transformed. Florists had spent 3 days turning the ballroom into a garden of white roses and candlelight. A string quartet rehearsed in the corner. And at the center of it all was Vanessa Cole, Daniel's fiancée-to-be, dressed in a golden gown that shimmered like she'd been poured from liquid sunlight. Her hair swept up in loose curls, diamonds glittering at her throat. Vanessa Cole was beautiful the way a knife is beautiful, sharp, cold, and dangerous if you got too close. She came from old money herself, the kind of family that vacationed in the Hamptons and never asked the staff their names. She'd been engaged to Daniel for 8 months, and in that time Maria had learned exactly one thing about her. Vanessa did not like being told no. Maria had been assigned to prepare the honeymoon suite adjoining the ballroom. Fresh linens, champagne on ice, rose petals scattered just so. She moved quickly and quietly, the way she always did, trying to finish before the guests arrived for the private engagement dinner that evening. That's when she saw it. On the vanity table in the honeymoon suite, half hidden beneath a silk scarf, was a small leather folder. Maria wasn't the type to pry. 6 years of cleaning other people's rooms had taught her that whatever you see, You forget the moment you leave. But the folder had fallen open, just slightly, and a single word on the top page caught her eye before she could look away. Guardianship. Beneath it, a name she recognized immediately. Robert Hartwell. Daniel's father. The man who had built this empire from a single motel on Route 9 in 1974. The man who, according to the hushed rumors among the staff, had been diagnosed 6 months ago with early-stage dementia. A secret the family had fought hard to keep out of the tabloids. Maria's hands froze on the pillow she was fluffing. She told herself it wasn't her business. She told herself to close the folder, finish the room and walk away. Exactly like she'd done 1,000 times before with 1,000 other secrets that weren't hers to carry. But something made her look closer. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the 6 years of watching wealthy people whisper behind closed doors while she cleaned in silence. Invisible, learning more about them than they ever realized. Whatever it was, Maria leaned in. And what she read in the next 30 seconds would change everything. It wasn't just a guardianship form. It was a petition, drafted, signed, and dated just 2 days ago, to have Robert Hartwell declared mentally incompetent. And attached to it, stapled at the corner, was a revised will. A will that, if the petition succeeded, would transfer controlling interest of the entire Hartwell Hotel empire not to Daniel, the rightful heir, but to Vanessa Cole upon their marriage. Maria's heart began to pound. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't a secret about an affair or a hidden debt. This was a plan, a calculated, legal, terrifyingly patient plan, to strip a sick old man of his own company and hand a fortune worth billions to a woman who wasn't even family yet. And in 6 hours, that woman was getting engaged in the ballroom just down the hall. Maria didn't know what to do. Her hands were shaking. She should walk away. She should forget what she saw, just like always. But then she heard the door behind her creak open, and a voice, sharp as broken glass, said her name. "What exactly?" Vanessa Cole asked, standing in the doorway in her golden gown. "Do you think you're doing with my things?" Nobody was prepared for what came next. Maria spun around so fast the pillow slipped from her hands and landed on the floor. Vanessa stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, her eyes locked not on Maria's face, but on the leather folder still open on the vanity table. For a long, terrible moment, nobody said anything. I was just finishing the linens," Maria stammered, stepping back instinctively, the way she'd trained herself to do around difficult guests. Quiet. Non-threatening. "I didn't touch anything, I promise." That folder was closed. Vanessa's voice was calm in the way that scared Maria more than shouting would have. She crossed the room in 3 long strides, snapped the folder shut, and tucked it under her arm. "You read it." "No, I just saw the cover, I didn't." "Did you read it?" Maria's mouth went dry. She thought of Diego, waiting for her tonight with his inhaler and his crooked smile. She thought of the rent due in 11 days. She thought of every reason in the world to say no. "I saw nothing, I'll forget it, please let me go back to work." But something in her, something stubborn, something that had survived 6 years of being invisible, made her hesitate just a half-second too long. And Vanessa saw it. "Security," Vanessa said into the small radio clipped to her wrist, not even raising her voice. "I need someone to the honeymoon suite immediately. We have a staff member who's been going through private guest documents." "That's not what happened," Maria said, her voice cracking now, panic rising in her chest like water filling a sinking boat. "Please, I have a son, I need this job. I swear I didn't take anything." "Then you won't mind waiting for security to confirm that," Vanessa said, smiling, actually smiling, as if this were all a mildly amusing inconvenience rather than a woman's entire livelihood hanging by a thread. 2 security guards arrived within 90 seconds. This was the Hartwell Grand, after all, where response time to a rich woman's discomfort was faster than an ambulance to a heart attack. They didn't ask Maria for her side of the story. They didn't need to. Vanessa Cole was about to become the future Mrs. Hartwell, and Maria Alvarez was a maid making $16 an hour. "We're going to need you to come with us," one guard said, not unkindly, but firmly, a hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching it. "Ms. Cole believes there may have been a security breach involving confidential guest materials." "I didn't take anything." Maria's voice broke completely now, tears spilling before she could stop them. "Check my cart, check my pockets, I have nothing, please." But nobody was listening. That was the cruelest part. Not the accusation itself, but the silence that followed it. 6 years of scrubbing floors, of folding towels at 5 a.m., of being the first one there and the last one to leave. And in 30 seconds, none of it mattered. She was just a name on a spreadsheet now. A liability. A problem to be handled quietly before the important guests arrived. They walked her out of the honeymoon suite and down the hallway, toward the private glass elevator that connected the executive floors, the one reserved for VIPs, the one with walls of crystal-clear glass that let you see straight down through all 58 floors of marble and gold as you descended, like floating through the inside of a diamond. It was, Maria thought bitterly, a beautiful place to have the worst moment of her life. As the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, Maria caught sight of her own reflection in the glass. Mascara running, purple uniform stained with cleaning solution, hands trembling. She looked exactly like what they thought she was. Someone who didn't belong here. "Wait." The voice came from down the hall, calm but carrying easily across the marble floor. "What's going on?" Maria turned. Daniel Hartwell stood at the far end of the corridor in a dark navy suit. His tie loosened, clearly on his way to check on the ballroom preparations. He wasn't smiling the easy, distracted smile Maria remembered from 6 years of silent nods. His brow was furrowed, his eyes moving quickly between the 2 security guards, Maria's tear-streaked face and Vanessa, who was walking toward him now with a leather folder still tucked protectively under her arm. "It's nothing, darling," Vanessa said smoothly, sliding her free hand around his arm. "Just a small issue with the staff. Nothing you need to worry about tonight of all nights." But Daniel's eyes stayed on Maria. And for the first time in 6 years he actually looked at her. Really looked the way you look at a person and not a uniform. Something flickered behind his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or suspicion. Or the first crack in a story that was about to fall apart entirely. "Put her in the elevator," Vanessa said quietly to the guards, her grip tightening slightly on Daniel's arm as if to steer his attention away. "We'll sort it out downstairs. We have guests arriving in an hour." The doors began to close. And that's when Maria, trembling, terrified, with absolutely nothing left to lose, reached into her apron pocket, pulled out her phone, and held it up against the glass for Daniel to see. Just as the elevator doors sealed shut and it began its slow, silent rise into the golden light of the chandeliers above. On the screen, frozen mid-frame, was a photograph she had taken of the open folder 3 minutes earlier. The petition, the forged signature, and Vanessa Cole's name typed clearly beneath the words sole beneficiary. Everyone thought they knew what was happening. They were completely wrong. The glass elevator rose slowly, deliberately, as if the entire building wanted to draw this moment out as long as possible. Maria stood inside, trapped, her back pressed against the cool glass wall, watching through tear-blurred eyes as the marble lobby fell away beneath her feet floor by floor. She could see Daniel through the glass, frozen in place, staring up at the photograph still glowing on her phone screen. His face changed. It happened slowly at first. Confusion, then something sharper, something that looked almost like recognition dawning in slow motion. He said something to Vanessa that Maria couldn't hear through the glass, but she saw Vanessa's smile falter for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. "Daniel, sweetheart, let's not do this here," Vanessa said, loud enough now that Maria could just make out the words through the elevator's thin seal. "She's clearly unstable. Probably trying to extort us for a payout. You know how these things go." "What was that on her phone?" Daniel asked. His voice had changed too, The polite distraction Maria had known for 6 years was gone, replaced by something colder, more focused. Nothing. Paperwork. She must have photographed something from housekeeping. That wasn't housekeeping paperwork, Vanessa. Daniel's eyes hadn't left the elevator, even as it climbed past the 10th floor, the 15th, the 20th. I know my father's letterhead when I see it. Inside the elevator, Maria's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed the emergency stop button and nothing happened. A red light blinked uselessly on the control panel. Executive override in progress, the small screen read. Someone downstairs had control of the elevator, and it wasn't her. She was trapped. 60 floors up, in a glass box suspended over an open atrium, with the one piece of evidence that could expose an entire conspiracy sitting in her hand. And no idea if anyone would believe her before Vanessa found a way to make the evidence, and the woman holding it, disappear. Maria thought of Diego. She thought about what would happen to her 7-year-old son if his mother lost her job over an accusation she didn't commit, or worse, if something happened to her in this elevator that nobody downstairs could explain. Panic rose in her chest like floodwater. She banged on the glass, screamed for help, but the elevator shaft was silent except for the low hum of the motor pulling her higher and higher into the golden light of the atrium's massive crystal chandelier. And then, through the glass 40 floors below, she watched something extraordinary happen. Daniel Hartwell pulled his arm free from Vanessa's grip. "Stop the elevator," he said to the security guard standing beside the control panel. His voice carrying an authority Maria had never heard from him before. Not the soft, distracted heir to a hotel empire, but a man who suddenly understood exactly what kind of danger his family was in. "Bring her back down. Now." "Daniel, you're overreacting," Vanessa said, her composure cracking further, a note of real panic slipping into her voice for the first time. "This is our engagement night. Whatever that woman thinks she saw, it doesn't matter." "It matters a great deal," Daniel said, "if it's a petition to have my father declared incompetent." The lobby went silent. Guests who had begun arriving early for the evening celebration, men in tailored suits, women dripping in jewelry, turned to watch, sensing that something far more interesting than a routine engagement dinner was unfolding in front of them. "You've been going through my things," Vanessa said, her voice climbing, losing its practiced smoothness entirely now. "That's an invasion of privacy, Daniel. I could have that maid arrested for theft, and frankly, I could have you arrested for." "For what, Vanessa?" Daniel turned to face her fully now, and something in his eyes had gone very still and very cold. "For asking why there's a forged medical evaluation of my father sitting in a folder in your suite, dated 2 days ago, with a signature from a doctor who, as far as I know, has never once examined him." Vanessa said nothing. And in the silence, 40 floors up, trapped behind glass, Maria Alvarez pressed her palm flat against the cool surface and watched the entire architecture of a billion-dollar lie begin, at last, to crack. The elevator jolted. The red light on the panel blinked, then turned green. Descending, the screen read. Maria closed her eyes, clutched her phone to her chest, and for the first time in 6 years, allowed herself to believe that someone, finally, was actually seeing her. Everything looked perfect. Until it wasn't. The elevator descended in near silence, the golden light of the chandeliers sliding past the glass walls like liquid honey as Maria fell floor by floor back toward the lobby. Her hands were still shaking, but something else had settled over her now, a strange, fragile hope she hadn't let herself feel in years. Someone had listened. Someone with power, someone who could actually change what happened next, had finally listened. When the doors slid open at the ground floor, the lobby had transformed into something out of a courtroom drama rather than an engagement party. Dozens of arriving guests stood frozen near the entrance, phones lowered, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Robert Hartwell's personal attorney, an older man named Mr. Kowalski who had represented the family for 30 years, had been summoned and stood near the concierge desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, flipping through pages that a visibly shaking security guard had printed from Maria's phone at Daniel's insistence. Vanessa stood near the fountain in the center of the lobby, arms crossed, jaw tight, the golden gown that had looked so triumphant an hour earlier now seeming almost costume-like, a disguise slowly slipping off a woman the room was only just beginning to truly see. Maria stepped out of the elevator on unsteady legs. A guard reached to guide her, not toward the exit this time, but toward Daniel, who crossed the lobby floor in long, urgent strides and stopped directly in front of her. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice had none of the polished formality she remembered from 6 years of silent nods in hallways. It was raw, human, scared even in a way that surprised her. "I'm fine," Maria said quietly, though her voice still trembled. "I just want to go home to my son." "You will," Daniel said. "But first, I need you to tell me everything. And I need you to know that whatever you saw in that room today, you were right to hold on to it. You may have just saved my father's entire life's work. And possibly his life." Mr. Kowalski approached, holding the printed photograph of the petition, his expression grim. "Daniel, this is a genuine legal document. It's been drafted properly. Dangerously properly. If it had been filed with the court alongside a medical evaluation, even a fraudulent one, it could have moved through the system before anyone caught it. Robert could have lost guardianship of his own affairs within 30 days. And the revised will?" Daniel asked, though from the tightness in his jaw, he already knew the answer. "Names Ms. Cole as controlling shareholder upon marriage, contingent on Robert being declared incompetent. It's dated 2 days ago." Kowalski looked up, over his glasses, directly at Vanessa. "I'd very much like to know who drafted this for you, Ms. Cole, because whoever it was committed several serious crimes on your behalf." The lobby had gone completely silent now. Every guest, every staff member, every wealthy stranger in designer clothing holding their breath to watch the golden woman in the center of the room finally run out of places to hide. "This is absurd," Vanessa said, but her voice had lost its edge entirely, thinning into something closer to desperation. "Robert has been declining for months. Everyone in this family knows it. I was simply protecting the company. Protecting Daniel. Someone had to think practically while all of you were too sentimental to face the truth." "You weren't protecting anyone," Daniel said quietly. "You were stealing from a sick old man who trusted you at his dinner table for 8 months. And you were about to marry me to make it legal." Something in Vanessa's face finally cracked all the way open, not into remorse, Maria noticed, but into fury. The fury of someone whose careful plan had unraveled because of a maid she'd never once bothered to see as a person. "You have no idea what it's like," Vanessa hissed, "to watch people who did nothing to earn their money live like kings while the rest of us fight for scraps at their table. I earned this. I earned every bit of what I was going to have. By forging documents to steal a sick man's company." Daniel asked. "That's not earning anything, Vanessa. That's just theft with better lighting." Security, rail security this time, along with 2 NYPD officers who had been quietly called in by Mr. Kowalski the moment he'd seen the forged signature, moved toward Vanessa. She didn't resist. She simply stood very still in her golden dress, the diamonds at her throat catching the chandelier light one last time, as the officers explained her rights in a lobby full of people who, 20 minutes earlier, had been ready to toast her engagement. Maria watched it all from a few feet away, still clutching her phone, still trying to process that the woman who'd nearly had her arrested was the one now being led toward a waiting police car. Then Daniel turned back to her. "I owe you an apology," he said. 6 years, and I never once asked your name." "Maria," she said softly. "Maria Alvarez." "Maria," he repeated, as if committing it permanently to memory. "You just protected my father from something none of us saw coming. I don't know how to begin to thank you for that." Maria managed a small, exhausted smile. "You could start," she said, "by not letting security escort me out of a building for doing the right thing next time. For the first time all evening, Daniel Hartwell laughed. A real laugh, tired and relieved and a little disbelieving. And something about that sound told Maria that whatever happened next, this story was far from over. But nobody could explain what happened after that. 3 days passed. Maria went back to her normal routine, waking at 5, kissing Diego's forehead before he left for school, riding the subway into Manhattan with her uniform folded carefully in her bag so it wouldn't wrinkle. She told herself the whole incident was over. Vanessa was gone, facing serious fraud charges that would likely keep her occupied in courtrooms for years. The engagement obviously was off. Life at the Hartwell Grand would return to its usual rhythm, and Maria would go back to being invisible, exactly the way she'd learned to survive. Except it didn't happen that way. On the 4th day, Maria arrived for her shift to find the head of housekeeping, a stern woman named Ms. Peterson who had never once complimented Maria's work in 6 years, waiting for her by the staff entrance with an expression Maria couldn't quite read. "Mr. Hartwell wants to see you," Ms. Peterson said. "Robert Hartwell. Not Daniel. The father." Maria's stomach dropped. "Am I in trouble?" "I have no idea," Ms. Peterson admitted, which was somehow more frightening than a simple yes. Maria was led up to the 61st floor, a floor she'd never even known existed, hidden above the numbered guest floors, accessible only by a private keycard. It turned out to be the Hartwell family's actual residence, a sprawling apartment that took up the entire top of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park and furniture that looked older and more valuable than anything in the guest suites downstairs. Robert Hartwell sat in a leather armchair near the window, a blanket over his knees despite the warm afternoon sun, a cup of tea cooling untouched on the side table beside him. He was 81 years old, silver-haired, with the same sharp jawline Maria recognized from his son. His eyes, though slightly clouded with the early fog of his diagnosis, were still remarkably alert as she entered the room. "You're the young woman who saved my company," he said, not as a question, gesturing for her to sit in the chair across from him. "Daniel's told me everything. Several times, actually. I keep forgetting some of the details these days, so he's had to repeat it. But that particular story seems to be sticking." Maria didn't know what to say, so she simply sat, hands folded tightly in her lap, waiting. "Do you know," Robert continued, "that I built this entire company from a single motel with 14 rooms? Route 9, New Jersey, 1974. I cleaned those rooms myself for the first 3 years. Every bathroom, every bedsheet, every ashtray on every nightstand." He smiled faintly at the memory. "My father used to say the measure of a person isn't how they treat the people who can do something for them. It's how they treat the people who can't." He looked at Maria directly then, and despite the fog in his eyes, there was nothing unclear about what he said next. "Vanessa Cole never once looked at any of my staff like they were human beings. Not the maids, not the doormen. Not the kitchen crew who worked 12-hour shifts to keep this place running. I noticed that about her a long time ago, and I told myself it didn't matter, because Daniel seemed happy, and I was tired, and I let my guard down." He paused, his hands tightening slightly on the arms of his chair. "You didn't know me. You had every reason in the world to walk away and forget what you saw in that folder. Instead, you risked your job, maybe your safety, to protect a stranger." "I couldn't just do nothing," Maria said quietly. "It wasn't right what she was planning to do to you." "No," Robert agreed. "It wasn't. And very few people in this world would have done what you did, knowing what it might cost them." He reached for an envelope sitting on the side table beside his tea and held it out to her. Maria hesitated before taking it, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten in slightly unsteady script, and a document that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a job offer, not for housekeeping but for a newly created position, Director of Staff Relations, a role Robert explained he'd decided the company desperately needed after this entire ordeal had made him realize how little the people at the top actually knew about the people doing the real work every single day. The salary listed on the page was more than 4 times what Maria currently made. "I don't understand," Maria whispered. "I'm not qualified for something like this. I've been cleaning rooms for 6 years." "You spent 6 years learning exactly how this company treats the people who keep it running," Robert said. "That's the only qualification that actually matters for this job. Everything else will teach you." Maria stared at the paper in her hands, tears blurring the words, thinking of Diego, of the inhalers, of 6 years of 5 a.m. mornings and invisible labor that had suddenly, impossibly been seen. "Why me?" she managed to ask. Robert Hartwell smiled, and for a moment, the fog in his eyes seemed to clear entirely. "Because you held up your phone in a glass elevator with everything to lose," he said. "And you did it anyway. What happened next changed everything forever, but not without one more storm to weather first." Word of what happened at the Hartwell Grand didn't stay contained within the hotel's marble walls for long. Within a week, a business journalist who'd caught wind of Vanessa Cole's arrest through a court filing began digging deeper, and soon the story broke publicly. A socialite had attempted to defraud a beloved American hotel dynasty by forging medical documents against an elderly patriarch, and the person who stopped her wasn't a lawyer or an accountant, but a hotel maid who'd simply refused to look away. The story spread fast. Local news picked it up first, then national outlets, then it was everywhere. Maria's photo, taken from an old staff badge, splashed across headlines with titles like "The Maid Who Saved a Billion-Dollar Empire" and "Glass Elevator Justice. How One Woman's Courage Exposed a Fraud." Maria hated it, honestly. She'd never wanted attention. She'd wanted to protect a sick old man and keep her job, nothing more. Reporters started showing up outside her apartment in Queens, calling the hotel asking for comment, even trying to talk to Diego's school. It was overwhelming in a way she hadn't prepared for, and for the first few days after the story broke, she genuinely considered turning down Robert's job offer altogether, packing up, moving somewhere quiet where nobody knew her name. But then something happened that changed her mind. A woman named Carla, another housekeeper at the Hartwell Grand who Maria had worked alongside for 4 years but never really known beyond a shared nod in the break room, approached her quietly one morning before her shift. "I heard what you did," Carla said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I want you to know 3 years ago I saw something too. A guest, a senator's aide, I think, doing something I knew wasn't right. Financial records left open, similar to what you saw. I didn't say anything. I was scared. I needed the job." Carla's eyes filled with tears. "I've regretted it every single day since. You did what I was too afraid to do." That conversation stayed with Maria for days. She thought about how many people, housekeepers, doormen, kitchen staff, valets, moved invisibly through the lives of the wealthy every single day, seeing things, knowing things, staying silent because silence was the price of survival. She thought about how different things might be if just one more person, just occasionally, decided the risk was worth it. So Maria accepted Robert Hartwell's job offer. Her first act as Director of Staff Relations wasn't a grand policy overhaul or a corporate restructuring memo. It was smaller than that and far more personal. She created an anonymous reporting system, a simple, secure line any staff member at any Hartwell property could use to report anything that felt wrong, without fear of losing their job, without fear of being dismissed the way she nearly had been. She fought for better wages for the lowest paid staff, arguing to a boardroom full of executives that the people who kept the lights on, the sheets clean, and the lobby gleaming deserved more than pocket change and pretend gratitude. Daniel Hartwell, who had quietly stepped up to take a more active role in the company's daily operations after everything that happened with Vanessa, supported nearly every proposal Maria brought to the table. Over the following months, something unexpected grew between them. Not the fairy tale romance a lesser story might rush toward, but a genuine friendship built on mutual respect, late nights reviewing policy changes, and a shared understanding of what it meant to finally see people who had spent years being overlooked. Diego, meanwhile, adjusted to his new life slowly but happily. Maria used part of her new salary to move them into a slightly bigger apartment, closer to a hospital with better asthma specialists. And for the first time in years, she didn't lie awake at night doing anxious math about medication costs and rent due dates. But even as things improved, Maria never forgot where she came from, and she never let the Hartwell Grand staff forget that she remembered exactly what it felt like to be invisible. Nobody expected the truth to come out the way it did. Nobody expected a glass elevator and a phone held up against cold glass to become the turning point in a billion-dollar company's entire culture. But it did. And 6 months later, at the very same hotel where it all began, something happened that brought the whole story full circle. Something none of them could have predicted, not even Maria herself. Don't blink. You'll miss the biggest twist. 6 months after Vanessa Cole's arrest, the Hartwell Grand hosted its annual charity gala, the same kind of glittering, chandelier-lit event that had once made Maria feel like a ghost drifting invisibly through rooms full of people who never saw her. This year, though, Maria wasn't cleaning up after the gala. She was attending it, invited personally by Robert Hartwell as a guest of honor, a fact that still felt surreal every time she thought about it. She stood near the same fountain where Vanessa had once been arrested, wearing a simple navy dress instead of her purple uniform, watching the same golden chandeliers she used to dust from a rolling cart high above her head. Diego, now 8, sat at a nearby table with a plate of food he was far more interested in than the adults' conversation, wearing a small suit Maria had bought him for the occasion, looking impossibly proud of himself. That was when Robert Hartwell approached the small podium set up near the fountain, tapping a glass gently to draw the room's attention. "A year ago," he began, his voice steady despite the slight tremor that had become more noticeable in recent months, "I nearly lost everything I spent 50 years building. Not to a business rival, not to a bad investment, but to someone I trusted, sitting at my own dinner table." The room fell quiet. Maria felt her cheeks warm as several guests' eyes drifted toward her. "I was saved," Robert continued. "Not by a lawyer, not by a board member, not by anyone whose job it was to protect this company. I was saved by a woman who had every reason to walk away and mind her own business, and instead chose to do the harder, braver thing." He raised his glass toward Maria. "Tonight, I'd like to announce something Maria and I have been working on together for the past several months." Maria's heart skipped. She hadn't expected this. Robert had mentioned a small announcement earlier, but nothing about a public reveal in front of 200 guests. "Starting next year, the Hartwell Grand will launch the Alvarez Scholarship Fund," Robert said, providing full college scholarships to the children of hospitality workers, housekeepers, kitchen staff, valets, doormen, across every Hartwell property nationwide. Because the people who make this industry run deserve more than a paycheck. They deserve a future for their families. The room erupted into applause. Maria stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed, watching Diego's face light up with pride even though he was still too young to fully understand what was happening. She thought of Carla, of every housekeeper she'd ever worked beside who'd swallowed their own silence out of fear, and felt something in her chest crack open with an emotion too large for words. But the night wasn't finished delivering surprises. As the applause died down and guests returned to their conversations, a woman Maria didn't recognize approached her near the fountain, mid-50s, elegantly dressed but with a warmth in her expression that felt different from the polished coldness Maria had grown used to at events like this. "Maria Alvarez?" the woman asked. "My name is Judge Elena Ruiz. I presided over Vanessa Cole's fraud case." Maria blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, of course I remember your name from the trial coverage. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." "I asked Robert to invite me," Judge Ruiz said. "I wanted to meet the woman whose testimony helped convict one of the most calculated fraud attempts I've seen in 20 years on the bench." She paused, studying Maria with something like genuine curiosity. "Do you know what struck me most about your testimony?" Maria shook her head. You never once exaggerated. Never dramatized what you saw to make yourself seem more heroic. You simply told the truth plainly, even when it would have been easier, safer even, to soften the details or downplay your own role. Judge Ruiz smiled. That kind of honesty is rare, Ms. Alvarez. Rarer than courage, even. The conversation might have ended there, a pleasant compliment at a gala, if not for what Judge Ruiz said next. Something that would send Maria's entire understanding of that day in the glass elevator spinning in a direction she never could have anticipated. There's something else you should know, Judge Ruiz said, her expression shifting into something more serious. During Vanessa's sentencing hearing, new evidence surfaced. It turns out the forged medical evaluation wasn't Vanessa's idea originally. Maria's stomach tightened. What do you mean? She had help, Judge Ruiz said quietly. Someone inside this hotel. The silence that followed said everything. Maria felt the floor seem to tilt slightly beneath her feet. Someone inside the hotel, she repeated slowly. Who? Judge Ruiz glanced around the crowded room, lowering her voice further. The forensic document analysis during sentencing traced the forged medical letterhead to a printer registered on the 58th floor of this very hotel, the executive floor. Someone with access to Robert Hartwell's private office had helped Vanessa create the documents. Someone who knew the family's internal systems well enough to make the forgery nearly undetectable. Do you know who? Maria asked, her mind racing back through 6 years of faces, names, staff badges she'd passed in hallways without a second thought. The court case is sealed regarding the second party's identity, pending an ongoing internal investigation, Judge Ruiz said carefully. But I thought, given everything you did for this family, you deserved to know the full truth didn't end with Vanessa's arrest. Maria excused herself from the conversation as gracefully as she could manage, her thoughts spinning, and found Daniel near the bar, deep in conversation with 2 board members. She pulled him aside, relaying what Judge Ruiz had just told her, watching his expression shift from confusion to something darker and more troubled. I need to talk to my father, Daniel said quietly. They found Robert seated near the window, slightly removed from the noise of the party, Diego now curled up sleepily in the chair beside him, having apparently charmed his way into keeping Robert company while the adults mingled. Robert listened to Daniel's explanation with a growing frown, his fingers tightening slightly on the arm of his chair. I was told the investigation into the printer records was still ongoing, Robert said slowly. I hadn't heard they'd identified a location. The 58th floor, Daniel repeated. That's your private office floor. Who had access besides you, me, and... Daniel stopped mid-sentence, and Maria watched something click into place behind his eyes, a realization forming that clearly troubled him deeply. Miss Peterson, Daniel said quietly. Maria's breath caught. Miss Peterson, the stern head of housekeeping who had never once complimented Maria's work in 6 years, who had escorted her upstairs to meet Robert on that strange, frightening morning, who technically had keycard access to nearly every floor in the building, including the executive offices, as part of overseeing facilities maintenance. That can't be right, Maria said, though even as she spoke the words, uncomfortable memories were surfacing. Small moments over the years where Miss Peterson had seemed unusually cold toward her, unusually quick to write her up for minor infractions other maids were never disciplined for. She'd always assumed it was simply Ms. Peterson's personality. Now she wondered if there had been something else underneath it. Robert called Mr. Kowalski over immediately, and within minutes, the celebratory mood of the gala had shifted into something far more tense, though most guests remained blissfully unaware of the quiet crisis unfolding near the window. Kowalski made a call, spoke in hushed, urgent tones, and returned with a grim expression. The internal investigation team confirms it, he said. Ms. Peterson's credentials were used to access the executive floor printer 3 times in the 2 weeks before the engagement party. Financial records also show a wire transfer of $40,000 into her account, originating from an account linked to Vanessa Cole, dated 1 week before the forgery. The room seemed to hold its breath. Maria thought of every interaction she'd had with Ms. Peterson over 6 years, the woman who had trained her, supervised her, criticized her, and felt a strange, hollow kind of betrayal settle over her, even though Ms. Peterson had never been someone Maria particularly trusted or liked to begin with. Why would she do it? Maria asked quietly. What did Vanessa promise her? Kolsky checked his notes. According to the transfer records and a follow-up statement Ms. Peterson gave during questioning this afternoon, which, coincidentally, is why this all came to light today, Vanessa promised her a permanent position as head of household staff at the Cole family estate in the Hamptons, along with a significant salary increase, once Vanessa took control of the company. She was going to trade this hotel's future, Robert said slowly, shaking his head, for a job cleaning someone else's house. It was a strange, sad kind of irony that settled over the room. A woman who had spent her career overseeing housekeeping staff, who had built her entire professional identity on maintaining order and standards within the hotel, had ultimately sold out the very institution she served for the promise of a slightly better version of the same work elsewhere. What happens now? Maria asked. Now, Kowalski said, Ms. Peterson faces her own fraud charges. And this hotel finally closes the last open thread of an investigation that's taken far too long to resolve. Maria looked over at Diego, still asleep in the chair, unaware of the storm of revelations swirling around him, and felt an unexpected wave of exhaustion mixed with relief. The truth, it seemed, always had a way of surfacing eventually. Sometimes in a glass elevator, sometimes at a glittering gala 6 months later, but always, eventually, it found the light. This is the moment everything fell into place. In the weeks that followed the gala, the Hartwell Grand underwent changes that went far deeper than the scandal itself. Ms. Peterson's resignation, quiet before charges were formally filed, though the outcome of her case would eventually mirror Vanessa's in seriousness, left an opening that Robert and Daniel filled not with another outside hire, but with an internal promotion that surprised everyone except the person it happened to. Maria found herself, 6 months into her role as Director of Staff Relations, additionally overseeing housekeeping operations across all 3 Hartwell properties in New York. It was more responsibility than she'd ever imagined for herself, more than she sometimes felt fully ready for, but she approached it the same way she'd approached 6 years of 5 a.m. shifts. Quietly, thoroughly, and with a fierce protectiveness over the people working under her that Ms. Peterson had never once shown. She instituted mentorship programs pairing newer housekeepers with veterans. She fought successfully for mandatory rest breaks that had somehow never existed on paper before, despite labor laws technically requiring them. She made sure every single staff member, from the newest valet to the longest-tenured chef, knew her office door was open, and more importantly, that she'd actually listen. Diego thrived too, in the quiet, steady way children do when the invisible weight of their parents' stress finally lifts. He started asking questions about the hotel business at dinner, fascinated by the idea that his mother now helped make decisions in the same building where she used to fold towels into triangles. Maria found herself, more than once, quietly weeping in the bathroom after tucking him in, not from sadness, but from a gratitude so overwhelming it needed somewhere to go. Her relationship with Daniel deepened slowly, naturally, over shared dinners that started as business discussions and gradually became something warmer. Neither of them rushed it. Both had learned, in different ways, what it cost to trust the wrong person too quickly, and both seemed to understand instinctively that whatever was growing between them deserved patience rather than urgency. Robert Hartwell's health, meanwhile, continued its slow, difficult decline. The dementia diagnosis that Vanessa had once tried to weaponize for her own gain became, in its own tragic way, simply a part of the family's daily life. Good days and hard days, moments of startling clarity followed by confusion that broke Daniel's heart every time he witnessed it. But through it all, Robert remained fiercely proud of what had come out of the worst betrayal of his life. "You know," he told Maria one afternoon, during one of his clearer days, sitting in his usual chair by the window overlooking Central Park, "I used to think the measure of a good life was how much you built. The hotels, the properties, the numbers on a balance sheet." He looked at her, his eyes soft despite the fog that sometimes clouded them now. But I think I had it backward. The measure of a good life is how many people you lift up along the way. And you've taught me that more in 1 year than I learned in 50. Maria felt her throat tighten. You gave me the chance to do it, Mr. Hartwell. I just tried not to waste it. You didn't just try, Robert said. You succeeded. More than you'll probably ever fully understand. It was during one of these quiet afternoon conversations several months later that Robert made one final decision that would come to define the true, lasting impact of everything that had happened since that terrifying afternoon in the glass elevator. He called a private meeting with Daniel, Maria, and Mr. Kowalski, and announced his intention to establish a permanent governance structure ensuring that no single person, no fiancé, no business partner, no future executive, could ever again attempt what Vanessa Cole had tried to do. A portion of company oversight, he decided, would be permanently reserved for a staff advisory board. Actual hotel workers, not executives, given real voting power over policies affecting labor conditions, wages, and workplace protections across every Hartwell property. Maria would chair that board. It wasn't a fairy tale ending exactly. Not the kind with a wedding and a happily ever after wrapped in a bow within the same year. It was something better, something more real. A woman who had once been powerless enough to be nearly arrested for the crime of witnessing the truth, now holding actual, structural power to make sure no one else at the Hartwell Grand would ever have to face that same fear alone. This is one story you'll never forget, because it isn't finished yet. It's still being written, every single day, by people just like Maria who choose courage over convenience. A year to the day after that terrifying ride in the glass elevator, the Hartwell Grand hosted another gathering. Smaller this time, more intimate, held not in the grand ballroom but in a quiet garden on the hotel's rooftop terrace, string lights woven through the trees instead of crystal chandeliers overhead. It was Maria and Daniel's wedding. Diego, now 9, stood proudly beside his mother as she walked down a short aisle lined with the very people who had once been invisible to the guests who passed through the Hartwell Grand's marble lobby every day. Housekeepers, doormen, kitchen staff, and valets, all invited not as hired help for the event, but as honored guests. Carla sat in the second row, dabbing at tears she made no attempt to hide. Robert Hartwell, seated in the front row in his wheelchair, his health having declined further in recent months, watched his son marry the woman who had saved his company, his sanity, and in many ways, his faith in the goodness of people, with an expression of pure, unguarded joy. Maria wore a simple ivory dress, nothing like the golden gown Vanessa had once worn in this same building, and she found she preferred it that way. Simple, honest, entirely herself. As the ceremony ended and the small crowd rose in applause, Maria caught Daniel's eye, and in that moment, thought back to the terrified young woman who had stood trembling in a glass elevator a year earlier, certain her life was about to fall apart, with absolutely no idea that moment would become the very thing that saved it. Here's what this story leaves us with, friends. The truth that courage rarely announces itself with fanfare. It doesn't always look like a hero standing tall in a spotlight. Sometimes it looks like a tired, frightened woman holding up a phone against cold glass, terrified but refusing to look away from the truth, simply because it was the right thing to do. Maria Alvarez didn't set out to save a billion-dollar company. She didn't set out to become a symbol of anything. She simply refused, in one small, terrifying moment, to pretend she hadn't seen what she saw. And that one choice rippled outward into a scholarship fund that would change hundreds of families' futures, into fair labor protections for thousands of hospitality workers, into a young boy growing up watching his mother stand tall instead of shrink small. So if there's one thing to take from Maria's story tonight, let it be this. You never know which small, frightening moment of honesty might become the turning point of your entire life, or someone else's. The world doesn't always reward courage right away. Sometimes it costs you everything before it gives you anything back. But it is, without exception, always worth it. If this story moved you even half as much as it moved me while researching it, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we have so many more incredible true stories coming your way. And please share this with someone in your life who needs a reminder today that doing the right thing, even when it's terrifying, even when it costs you something, it always matters. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.